I start my bread by boiling a potato. This is a fresh red potato out of my garden, and I added to it the grainy stuff you see is the 12 grainy.
Potato water is boiling and turning into soft, mushy potatoes. I'm getting the rest of the batter ready. I start with about a cup of lukewarm water, a tablespoon of yeast, and I try to avoid sugar, so I add honey, and that's to sweeten up the yeast. The yeast eats the honey and turns into alcohol if you leave it long enough, but we're not leaving it that long. About a quarter cup of honey. I'm trying to squirt in here as it slowly runs down. And I usually make about 4 or 5 loaves at a time. So I'm just going to whisk that together. The other ingredients I add to my healthy bread is I add eggs, 3 eggs for protein, because my husband's really slim and he works really hard and he needs protein. So rather than buy protein shake, I add the eggs to the bread, and I add flaxseed, and some of that's in that stuff boiling on the stove, and this will go on top and on bottom, and salt. And I use rye flour, and I'm low on rye flour, so I'm going to go purchase some more while I do my sauce. And I use also whatever's on sale. It's called specialty flour, but it's a whole wheat specialty flour. It's sifted more and finer and less grain in it. But because I like a little bit of fiber, I actually buy the regular whole wheat flour as well, and I mix the two of them together. And just to get it to rise nicely, so I get a nice large rye bread. I don't mind the small rye bread, but we like sandwiches and lots of it, and so if I'm making 4 loaves of bread, I don't want them to be this high, I want them to be this high. So I do add white flour. So if you have problems with wheat, you will not like this recipe. None of it is rice flour, it's all pretty much rye yeast. Rise a little bit in here, and I'm going to whip in the eggs. And it calls for 3 tablespoons of salt, and I find that really hard, 3 tablespoons of salt. So I usually, it's kind of an old, I've altered an old Menninite recipe, because the Mennonites are really well known for their bread. Well, let's see what I got here. I'm a terrible one for just throwing it in my hand, so I'm going to do teaspoons. This is about a teaspoon in my hand. 2, 3. And I'm sure the salt makes it rise better and all that. But I have egg, and egg is a kind of a leaven as well, so I don't think I need as much salt. I'm going to get that salt in there. And we're going to add the rye flour to start with. And you notice how I nicely measured that rye flour. I would say that's probably at least 1.5 cups or 2 cups. We're going to have approximately 10 cups of flour of various kinds by the time we're done. There we go. That's now turning into kind of a mucky soup, thick pea soup kind of a texture. And we're just going to let that sit for a minute, see if it starts rising. I want to make sure at this stage that my yeast is really active and healthy, because there's no point in wasting all that flour if you have dead yeast. Next is our 3 tablespoons of oil. Now, I use various kinds of oil, sapphire oil, olive oil, and today I have sunflower oil. I accidentally bought it instead of the sapphire last time I was shopping. I think I was looking at the French side or something. I don't know. But anyways, the oil is 3 tablespoons of oil. The potato water is just about ready, so I'm just going to blend it up so the clumps of potato are smooth. And we'll add that to it. Get like a lukewarm liquid in here, almost to the top, because I'm going to allow at least another cup. I think I'll put about 3 cups of liquid in here. And I'm pretty sure I have about a cup of water with my potato. So we just get some lukewarm water here. Pour that in. And it looks like the yeast is alive. I don't think it's going to hurt to put some more of this flour in. We're going to end up with a total of, probably because I added potato water, because I added the eggs actually, which form a kind of a liquid base. It calls for 10 cups of flour. I usually end up putting at least 12 or 14, because the eggs, which make it a little more liquidy, and the honey that I used instead of sugar. But you know, you can tell when you're kneading it whether it needs more or less flour. So there we go. So far we have the rye flour in, cup and a half. And now I'll go with the whole wheat. Now I don't put all of the flour in. This is the coarse whole wheat I'm putting in first. That'll give it a chance to soften in this sloot. And I'm going to put about 2 cups of that. And I'm going to stir it again. And then at this point I leave it. I go away and I leave it and I just let it bubble and rise. And it was a German lady, an older German lady who I lived with when I was very young, who taught me how to make bread this way. We call this the soup bowl stage. And it'll make the yeast multiply faster apparently and save you rising time through the day if you let the first rise be while it's in the sloppy stage. And just to show you how sloppy that is, okay, this is the sloppy stage. See how it's just like, oh, I'd say thick pea soup maybe? Okay, it's not firm at all. And this is the stage where I start my first rising. And I'm just going to, I just came back from a local bulk store and I purchased more dark rye flour. But I found a different flour there. And it's for people who are celiac. It was on sale, so it wasn't a bad price. It's called flour. K-A-M-U-T, Kamut flour. Anyway, it was on sale, and it's easy to digest, and so if you're a celiac, you could substitute all your recipes that you'd call for white flour. Apparently, you can use this. Now, I want you just to see how this is right.
Camera doesn't really give you a good idea, but anyways, can you see how frothy this is now? It looks like a brew, like something alcoholic almost. That's that yeast and honey working together, and basically it is a brew. So I'm going to add more of my rye flour and then a little more of my whole wheat flour until I get up to about 9 cups, and then I'll put a cup of white flour in. The quantities of water are more like 4 cups of water and 4.5 cups of water, then your cup that your yeast is in, and then of course the liquid that was the potato water. So I'm guessing you're looking at like 6 cups of liquid for the amount of bread I'm making today.
Now this is how I do my first kneading. Now you make sure your hands are thoroughly washed and keep all your rings off, any jewelry. Make sure your nails are clean. And make sure you're very dry. You don't want wet hands because then the batter will stick all over your hands. In fact, I like to rub a little bit of oil on my hands, which I put the oil away, so I'll have to get it out again. So I sift some flour on my little bake sheet here, because when I dump this batter out, it's going to be really gucky. I'll set that aside. I stir a little more of that rye flour through that I just added, some more of that fresh rye flour. There we go. When I was 16, I was married. And I moved into a house with a pastor and wife, and the woman that I moved in with was a pioneer, I'll tell you. She was something. And she had 7 children, and she made everything. She made a bread, kind of like my friend Arlene, actually. And she taught me everything I know pretty much about sewing and baking and quilting, and she teach me to knit or crochet. I learned that later. But I made all my, at 16 years old, I made all of my first baby's clothing for her, diapers, everything. She helped me do that. I learned how to bake bread and pies and soup and stew and all that kind of stuff. I worked part-time, and when I carried my first child, I worked for a teacher who had 5 children. See how it sticks to your hands? I worked for a teacher who had 5 children and did housework and cooking for her. Okay. It's still a little sticky, so I keep adding a little more flour and I flip it over. And I knead and I turn, I knead and I turn and I knead and I turn. And I just keep doing that. And each time I do that, it's sucking up a little more of that flour into it and getting rid of the sticky feeling. I think it's just about ready. So a few more kneads. It's still a little bit sticky in the middle, so I might put one more little dash of flour on it and work it in, and then we'll cut it and put it in the roast pans. the baking pans and let it rise again. Now my mother used to like it to rise 3 times before she put it in the bake pans. I usually let it do that sloop rising, and then I let it rise another half hour maybe while I grease my pans and clean up the mess of my kitchen. And then I put it in my bake pans and dividing it evenly between them. Sometimes there's a little bit extra, and I actually, even though it's a multigrain bread dough, sometimes I sweeten it up a bit with maple syrup, the last little bit by folding in maple syrup, and then I roll it out and I butter it, put a little bit of sugar and cinnamon and raisins on it, and sometimes some nuts, and make kind of a Chelsea bun, just a little bit of that. Even in spite of it being a rye bed multi-grain kind of a thing, it makes not a bad Chelsea bun. And my husband likes Chelsea buns, and I'm thinking this is about ready. See, it's still breathing, it's still coming back after I poke it, it's not dead. And so I'm going to warm that, put it back in the bowl and let it rise while I clean up my kitchen. And then I'll get my bake pans out and grease them and get them ready to go in the oven. I'll roll it out similar to this, and I'll divide it evenly, and I'll put it in the pans and let it rise till it gets to the top of the bake pans, and then I'll turn the oven on and bake it, and then I'll show you the end cut when I'm all done. Okay, I've washed up most of my dishes and I bottled my pasta sauce, and I find the best way to divide the dough, it's a complete circle. So I just divide it crossways and then again crossways. That way you get 4 equal loaves if you're going to do 4. And I promised a loaf to the lady who gives me my eggs. So maybe I didn't cut that in the middle very good. My sifter again, and off to the side, I put a little more flour under each quarter as I do it. And I just roll it the bottom sides up, like you're folding up a diaper kind of. And then I flip it over, and I kind of bounce the bottoms in the dough, or in the flour, until I got this nice form little loaf, and I put it in the pan. And I'm going to do all 4 of them. And now you whisk together some egg white until it's frothy. And then you brush the egg white on the top of the loaf that you've just put in the pan. You're going to do that to all 4 of them. And the purpose of this is where I'm going to put my flax seeds. And if I don't put the egg white on the pan, the flax seeds will all fall off in the oven. So I put lots of flax seeds because they're really good for you, and I like the toasted taste of them. And then I poke them in with my fingers in the top of the bread, and it'll rise up again and the little holes will disappear. But it works the flaxseed into the bread down to that layer. Now they're all in their pan. My mom always used to say, put them to bed and let them rise. And so they put them under the blanket and keep them warm, keep the air off them so the tops don't get hard. Let them rise till they're just above the edge of the pan. And then we turn the oven on, and they'll rise while the oven's warming, and we'll bake them.